In the summer of 1914, the world stood on the brink of a conflict that would forever change the course of history. What began as a local tragedy in the Balkans quickly escalated into a global war, engulfing nations and continents in an unprecedented struggle. Over the next 4 years, the world would witness the horrors of trench warfare, the rise of new technologies, and the collapse of empires that had ruled for centuries. This is the story of World War I, a war that redefined what it meant to fight, to sacrifice, and to survive. But how did it start? Who were the key players? And what lasting impact did it have on the world we live in today? Join us as we explore the major causes, pivotal events, and profound consequences of the First World War, a conflict that reshaped nations, societies, and the very nature of warfare. Major causes and pivotal events of the First World War, 1914 to 1918, underlying causes of the conflict, imperial ambitions and colonial rivalries. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were marked by intense imperial competition among European powers, stemming largely from the scramble for colonies. Germany's relatively late expansion into colonial territories, such as parts of Africa and the Pacific, heightened its rivalry with established colonial empires like Britain and France. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, which formalized the partitioning of Africa among European powers, underscored Germany's ambitions but also sowed discord. These colonial rivalries extended to Asia, where nations like Japan and Russia also sought to assert influence. Consequently, imperial ambitions created a tense and often confrontational global environment. Economic factors also played a role. The Industrial Revolution enabled European nations to extract more resources from their colonies and produce advanced weaponry. This economic competition further exacerbated rivalries, as nations sought to secure markets for their goods and sources of raw materials. The intersection of these economic and colonial ambitions laid the groundwork for an atmosphere of mutual suspicion and hostility among the major powers. Militarism and the pre-war arms race. The belief in military strength as a guarantor of national security led to significant investments in armed forces and advanced weaponry. Nations viewed their military capacity as not only a deterrent but also a tool for achieving foreign policy objectives. Germany's naval expansion under Kaiser Wilhelm II, aimed at challenging Britain's long-standing naval dominance, epitomized the growing militarism of the era. The Anglo-German naval arms race saw the construction of dreadnought-class battleships, which represented cutting-edge military technology. On the continent, the arms race manifested in the growth of standing armies and the stockpiling of artillery and munitions. Germany developed the Schlieffen Plan, a military strategy designed to quickly defeat France before turning eastward to confront Russia. France responded with its Plan 17, emphasizing rapid offensives into Alsace-Lorraine. These strategies reflected a broader assumption that any future conflict would be short and decisive, a belief that would prove tragically incorrect. Militarism also shaped public attitudes. Parades, military drills, and nationalist propaganda glorified armed conflict and fostered a sense of inevitability about war. This cultural militarization was mirrored in literature and popular media, which often romanticized the notion of war as a noble and heroic endeavor. The system of alliances. The formation of opposing alliances created a precarious balance of power in Europe. The Triple Alliance, comprising Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, was countered by the Triple Entente, which included France, Russia, and Britain. While these alliances were ostensibly defensive, they had the unintended consequence of escalating localized disputes into broader conflicts. The Balkan region, for example, was a frequent flashpoint due to overlapping interests and ethnic tensions. Austria-Hungary's alliance with Germany emboldened its assertiveness in the region, while Russia's support for Slavic nations like Serbia heightened tensions. These alliances also fostered a sense of inevitability about war. As nations felt bound to honor their commitments regardless of the circumstances. Nationalism and ethnic tensions. Nationalism played a dual role in the lead-up to the First World War. On one hand, it united populations within nation-states, fostering a sense of collective identity and purpose. On the other hand, it exacerbated rivalries between nations and deepened ethnic divisions within multi-ethnic empires. In Austria-Hungary, for instance, Slavic nationalism posed a direct challenge to the Habsburg monarchy, as groups sought greater autonomy or outright independence. In Germany, nationalism was intertwined with militarism and a desire for global prestige. The concept of Weltpolitik, world policy, emphasized Germany's aspirations for a dominant role in international affairs, often at the expense of established powers like Britain and France. Meanwhile, in Serbia, nationalist movements sought to unite all South Slavs into a single state, a goal that clashed with Austro-Hungarian interests in the Balkans. The Balkan powder keg. The Balkans were a hotspot of geopolitical rivalry and ethnic tension, earning the region its reputation as the powder keg of Europe. The decline of Ottoman influence created a power vacuum that Austria-Hungary and Russia sought to fill, often at each other's expense. The Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913, which saw Serbia's territorial expansion, further destabilized the region. Austria-Hungary viewed a strong Serbia as a direct threat, while Russia saw itself as the protector of Slavic nations. This volatile mix of territorial disputes, ethnic aspirations, and great power rivalries made the Balkans an epicenter of instability. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914 would ultimately ignite this powder keg, setting off a chain reaction that drew the major powers into conflict. Broader geopolitical context. To fully grasp the onset of the First World War, one must consider the broader context of geopolitical rivalries and cultural factors. Ideologies such as social Darwinism provided intellectual justification for imperialism and militarism, framing international competition as a natural and inevitable struggle for survival. The proliferation of secret treaties further complicated diplomatic relations, as nations often acted without full knowledge of their allies' intentions. Key events of the war: assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, June 28, 1914, the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist, in Sarajevo set off a chain reaction of events. Princip's act was rooted in broader Slavic nationalist aspirations to resist Austro-Hungarian domination. This assassination not only provided Austria-Hungary with a pretext to act against Serbia but also highlighted the fragile state of European diplomacy. The event demonstrated how localized incidents could escalate due to the interconnected nature of alliances and rivalries. Austria-Hungary's response, bolstered by German assurances of support, ultimately set the stage for a broader conflict. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, July 28, 1914. Following the assassination, Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia, demanding measures to suppress anti-Austrian activities. Serbia's response, while conciliatory, was deemed insufficient, leading Austria-Hungary to declare war. This event activated the web of alliances, drawing other major powers into the conflict within weeks. The declaration of war also underscored the limitations of diplomacy, as both sides were unwilling or unable to de-escalate the situation. Austria-Hungary's actions reflected a broader pattern of aggressive posturing that characterized pre-war international relations. The Battle of the Marne, September 6 to 12, 1914, the First Battle of the Marne marked a critical turning point early in the war. German forces, advancing rapidly through Belgium and northern France, threatened to capture Paris. However, the French and British armies, aided by timely reinforcements, launched a counteroffensive that halted the German advance. This battle signified the failure of the Schlieffen Plan and ushered in the era of trench warfare. The resulting stalemate would define much of the conflict on the Western Front, as both sides dug in and prepared for a protracted struggle. Additional battles, social impacts, and technological advancements will follow in similar depth to ensure a comprehensive narrative that spans the required length. The Battle of Verdun, February-December 1916. The Battle of Verdun was one of the longest and most grueling engagements of the war. Fought between French and German forces, it became a symbol of French determination and sacrifice. The Germans sought to bleed the French army dry by attacking a site of symbolic importance, with the goal of inflicting maximum casualties and forcing France to commit large resources. The French response, under the leadership of General Philippe Pétain, was to hold the line at all costs. The battle was characterized by relentless artillery bombardments, trench warfare, and heavy casualties on both sides. By the end of the battle, Verdun had become a symbol of national unity for France. But the immense loss of life, over 700,000 casualties, highlighted the brutal, attritional nature of the conflict. The stalemate at Verdun mirrored the broader deadlock on the Western Front, where both sides were unable to secure decisive victories. The Battle of the Somme, July-November 1916, the Battle of the Somme, fought between British and German forces, was another major engagement of 1916 and was notable for the scale of its casualties and the tactics employed. The British, under General Douglas Haig, sought to break the deadlock of trench warfare with a massive offensive. The first day of the battle saw the British suffer nearly 60,000 casualties, the largest one-day loss in British military history. The battle was marked by heavy use of artillery and the introduction of the tank, a new and innovative weapon designed to cross the difficult terrain of no man's land. However, despite the massive bombardment and initial gains, the offensive did not achieve the breakthrough that was hoped for. By the time the battle ended in November, over 1 million men had been killed or wounded, and the front lines remained largely unchanged, underscoring the futility and costliness of the war of attrition. The U.S. entry into the war, April 6, 1917, the entry of the United States into World War I was a significant turning point in the conflict. Initially, President Woodrow Wilson sought to keep the U.S. neutral, but several factors pushed the country into the war. Among the most important were unrestricted submarine warfare by Germany and the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico against the United States. Germany's policy of sinking neutral ships, including American vessels, angered the U.S. public and government. When the United States declared war on Germany in April 1917, it brought fresh troops, material support, and financial resources to the Entente powers. The U.S. entry into the war provided a much-needed boost to the weary Allied forces and helped tip the balance in favor of the Allies. The Russian Revolution and the withdrawal from the war, 1917. The Russian Revolution of 1917 had profound consequences for the Eastern Front and the broader course of the war. After years of military hardship and social unrest, the Russian Empire was plunged into revolution. In February 1917, Tsar Nicholas II was overthrown, and a provisional government took power. However, by October 1917, the Bolshevik Party, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized control in a second revolution and began negotiating for peace with the Central Powers. The subsequent Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed in March 1918, marked Russia's exit from the war. This allowed Germany to shift its focus to the Western Front. But by this time, the entry of the United States and the increasing exhaustion of the Central Powers limited the impact of Russia's withdrawal. The collapse of Russia also paved the way for the rise of communist influence in Eastern Europe and contributed to the political instability that followed the war, the 100 Days Offensive, August-November 1918. In the summer of 1918, the Allies launched a series of offensives known as the 100 Days Offensive. This was a coordinated effort across multiple fronts, including the Western Front, Italy, and the Balkans. The offensives were supported by fresh American forces and advanced artillery and tanks. The German army, already stretched thin by the failure of its spring offensives and the continued pressure from Allied forces, was unable to withstand the Allied onslaught. The battles of the 100 Days were marked by rapid Allied advances, the collapse of German defenses, and the eventual retreat of German forces. By November 1918, the Central Powers were in disarray, and Germany signed an armistice, effectively ending the fighting. The signing of the armistice, November 11, 1918. The armistice that ended World War I was signed on November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., marking the end of hostilities on the Western Front. This agreement, while not a peace treaty, established the terms for a ceasefire, with Germany agreeing to withdraw its troops and surrender significant territory. The signing of the armistice was a relief to millions of soldiers and civilians who had suffered through years of brutal conflict. The armistice did not, however, settle the broader issues of the war. The subsequent Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, would address the terms of peace and impose harsh penalties on Germany, including territorial losses, military restrictions, and reparations, social, cultural, and technological impacts. The human cost of the war. The First World War was one of the deadliest conflicts in history, with an estimated 16 million deaths, including both military personnel and civilians, and over 20 million wounded. The vast scale of casualties resulted in profound social and demographic changes. The war left entire generations scarred, with countless families mourning the loss of fathers, sons, and brothers. The psychological impact of the war was also significant, as many soldiers returned with what was then called shell shock, now recognized as PTSD. The war's brutality led to a rethinking of military strategy and tactics, as well as a broader questioning of the value of war itself. The role of women in the war. The First World War had a transformative impact on the role of women in society. As men went off to fight, women took on roles in factories, offices, and other sectors previously dominated by men. This shift was particularly evident in Britain, where women worked in munitions factories and served in auxiliary military units. The war accelerated the women's suffrage movement, with many countries, including Britain and the United States, granting women the right to vote in the years following the war. The contributions of women during the war helped to challenge traditional gender roles and set the stage for the broader social changes of the 20th century. Technological advancements. The First World War saw the introduction and widespread use of new technologies that would change the nature of warfare forever. These included the use of tanks, airplanes, and poison gas. The tank, first used in the Battle of the Somme, proved to be an effective weapon for breaking through enemy lines. Although it was still in its early stages of development, airplanes were used for reconnaissance, bombing, and dogfighting, and they played a key role in shaping modern warfare. Poison gas, though initially effective, was highly controversial due to its devastating effects on soldiers and civilians alike. The war also spurred advancements in medicine. Communication technologies, such as radios, and military strategy. These innovations would have a lasting impact on both warfare and civilian life in the years to come. Conclusion. World War I was a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation, reshaping the political, social, and cultural landscape of the 20th century. The war was driven by complex, interrelated factors, including imperialism, militarism, nationalism, and ethnic tensions, which were exacerbated by the system of alliances and the volatile situation in the Balkans. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand served as the spark that ignited this global conflict. The war's legacy included significant changes in global power dynamics, the collapse of empires, such as the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires, and the emergence of new ideologies like communism and fascism. The harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles and the failure of the League of Nations set the stage for future conflicts, most notably World War II. Additionally, the cultural and social impacts of the war would reverberate through the decades, influencing everything from gender roles to the development of modern technology. As the dust settled and the trenches emptied, the world emerged from World War I forever changed. The war's staggering toll in lives and resources reshaped nations, redrew borders, and left a legacy of political and social upheaval. Empires fell, new ideologies rose, and the seeds for future conflicts were sown. But beyond the battles and treaties, World War I taught humanity a profound lesson: the cost of war, not just in terms of lives lost, but in the devastation it leaves behind. The scars of the Great War would linger for generations, shaping the world we know today. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most transformative conflicts in history. Be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more in-depth looks at the events that shaped our world.